Hi, it's Sue. Thanks for joining me for today's Bible reading for April 6th, and I'm reading 2 Samuel 4 through 7. Feel free to share your insights in the comments or even email if you'd like. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands became feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled. Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. Okay, time out already, 30 seconds into the reading. You notice it doesn't say who Saul's son was? Jonathan just died, so which son are we talking about? So this is back to the topic of analyzing this translation, the World English Bible. It has those unclear pronouns where it never gives you the antecedent of the pronoun to tell you who they're referring to. It'll be talking about John Doe, and then it'll say she's something or he's something, but it's not referring back to John Doe. It's referring to the person that answered John, something like that. So, and it has some illogical and awkward transitions. So interesting and odd sequencing. Like it'll have seemingly sentences out of order, but that's not just this version. A lot of the Bible does that. And in this one, I'm sure, or I assume it's just because it's such a literal translation, they purposely didn't make those adjustments because it would not be literal translation anymore after that. So it has to do with the methodology that they chose. It's a standard way of translating. So it's interesting. So anyway, here once again, they don't tell you who they're referring to, and there are places in the Bible where you simply can't get an answer for some things because it's just not there. Unless God shows you specifically what it is, you're just not going to know. So I don't know if there's a way to know, or if it tells us further down which son this is. Maybe just my ignorance because I don't know, who else it would have been. All right, so back to this. 4 verse 1. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands became feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled. Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin, for Beeroth was also considered a part of Benjamin, and the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have lived as foreigners there until today. So I love how they really tried to record and keep track of the tribes and the family line. Verse 4. Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news came out about Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel, and his nurse picked him up and fled. As he hurried, as she hurried to flee, he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. Now I've said that name 100 times, if ever, but it is a long word. Mephibosheth. The sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, went out and came at about the heat of day to the house of Ishbosheth as he took his rest at noon. They came there into the middle of the house as though they would have fetched wheat, and they struck him in the body, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. Now when they came into the house, as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck him, killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and went by the way of the Arabah all night. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David to Hebron, and said to the king, Behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. Yahweh has avenged the Lord of the king today of Saul and of his offspring. David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, As Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity, when someone told me, Behold, Saul is dead, thinking that he brought good news, I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house on his bed, should I now not require his blood from your hand? Rid the earth of you. David commanded his young men, and they killed them, cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them up beside the pool of Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's grave in Hebron. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led Israel out and in. Yahweh said to you, You will be a shepherd of my people Israel, and you will be prince over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king of Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them in Hebron before Yahweh, and they anointed King David over Israel. They anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. Now, wow. I mean, he was only 30, but he had lived a whole lifetime, it seems like, before that. Just reading through First Samuel, all the stuff that he went through. Wow. Verse 5. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. Excuse me. The king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who spoke to David, saying, The blind and the lame will keep you out of here, thinking, David can't come in here. Nevertheless, David took a stronghold of Zion. This is David's city. David said on that day, Whoever strikes the Jebusites, let him go up to the watercourse and strike those lame and blind who are hated by David's soul. Therefore they say, The blind and the lame can't come into the house. David lived in the stronghold and called it David's city. David built around from Milo and inward. David grew greater and greater, for Yahweh the God of armies was with him. Hiram, king of Tyre, so that's up north of Israel, sent messengers to David with cedar trees, carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. David perceived that Yahweh had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. Now, from what I understand, Hiram also was the one that helped Solomon, and he was a key part in building the Temple of Solomon. And if I remember correctly, of him bringing gold to him. And Pastor Ron Phillips wrote a book, and you can probably find videos on this or audio, but it's a book called The Hiram Code, and it talks about this whole scenario and how Hiram was so helpful and how God gave him peace. I think God gave Tyre or Hiram's kingdom 600 years of peace after this, just because of his friendship with Israel. So it's pretty interesting history there. And David fought all these encampments of giants and basically cleared out the land, and Solomon had peace during his reign. So thanks to David, he made alliances with different kings, and I guess from what I heard from what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. A really wonderful scholarly professor who teaches through the Bible. He said that there's main roadways. I think there was the one along the Mediterranean coast, one along the mountains and such, from Egypt all the way up, that there's like outposts along there and different, I guess, kings or maybe tribes, or I'm not really sure how it was all laid out, that kind of guarded or watched over or controlled the movement of goods and travel along those roadways. So somehow David, in all these battles and all these wars, was able to strategically take control or at least make alliances along those, and also destroyed the invaders that God did not want there. Banished them from the land or killed them, annihilated them. So this man Hiram, king of Tyre, is part of all this developing of the kingdom and eventually the first temple, Solomon's temple. So look for Pastor Ron Phillips, the Hiram Code. See if you can at least get like a video on it and hear about it. It's pretty interesting. So it says, verse 11, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messages to David with cedar trees, carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. David perceived that Yahweh had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. David took more concubines and wives for himself out of Jerusalem after he had come from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. These are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Eliashim, Elida, Eliphelet. Now remember, he also already had Amnon and a couple others, I never remember their names, and Absalom that I talked about a minute ago. Okay, so then it says, when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel. No, I talked about that yesterday, because I just recorded yesterday's a minute ago. But I talked about how there's a very interesting story about Amnon and Absalom. It's more of a saga that happened with those two that ended up like a domino effect, produced a devastation in Israel and for David. Verse 17 now. When the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek David, but David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. David inquired of Yahweh, saying, Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? Yahweh said to David, Go up, for I will certainly deliver the Philistines into your hand. David came to Baal Perazim, and David struck them there. Then he said, Yahweh has broken my enemies before me, like the breach of waters. That's breakthrough. Therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. They left their images there, and David and his men took them away. The Philistines came up yet again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. When David inquired of Yahweh and said, Yahweh said, You shall not go up. Circle around, excuse me, y'all. Circle around behind them and attack them in front of the mulberry trees. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, then stir yourself up. For then Yahweh has gone out before you to strike the army of the Philistines. David did so as Yahweh commanded him and struck the Philistines all the way from Geba to Gezer. Chapter 6. David again gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David arose and went with the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there God's ark, which is called by the name, even the name of Yahweh of armies, who sits above the cherubim. Okay, there's a little view into the place where God dwells, right? Because the ark on the earth is simply a representation of the one where God dwells. So it says, even the name of Yahweh of armies, who sits above the cherubim. And I believe that means, see, the cherubim were on the ark, so it's God's presence over this ark of the covenant. So it says they set God's ark on a new cart and brought it out of Abinadab's house that was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. They brought it out of Abinadab's house, which was in the hill, with God's ark, and Ahio went before the ark. David and all the house of Israel played before Yahweh with all kinds of instruments made of cypress wood, with harps and stringed instruments, with tambourines, with castanets, and with cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out for God's ark and took hold of it, for the cattle stumbled. Yahweh's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by God's ark. So I always wonder about this. Was it God's anger, or was it the fact that this is God's radiating glory? Like, I'm a nuclear power worker, so I can't resist thinking this way. There's this radiation that comes off of, there's God's radiating glory, right? And see, in nuclear power, we shield, depending what kind of particles and photons they are, depends on what kind of shielding you use. And for neutrons, you use concrete, gold, and water. So you have the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and later the temple. Everything's covered with gold. And then there's a big, thick veil covering the entrance. So I'm always thinking that must be shielding from this radiating glory, which of course is a different kind of radiation than nuclear radiation or alpha beta. It's different, alpha beta gamma. But I see the correlation. I know I'm stumbling through this explanation. So when I come back to this ark that somehow the presence was you're going to see in a minute, they put it in somebody's house and his house prospered. I mean, the glory seems to be a double-edged sword, so to speak, because, we're back on the subject of radiation. If you get too close to any kind of radiation, it's going to affect you. You have the radiation of the sun, you have radiation coming off of rocks, the radon. So you have this type of radiation in the ark, and God had given them poles to carry it with. So like in nuclear power, we have this thing called time, distance, and shielding. So you make a certain distance from the radiation depending on its radiation level, or you use a certain type of shielding to protect yourself. Well, God had given them poles to carry the ark with for a reason, right? And this guy didn't follow protocol. He reached out and touched it. Well, if you do that kind of thing in nuclear power, not only do you get in really big trouble with the company and the feds, you get hurt. So it's serious, and obeying God was serious to all these people. And so he recklessly reached out, touched the cart, and it says God's anger struck him. But when I hear that, I think to myself, well, he got too close to the radiation. You see what I'm getting at? That was kind of a long explanation to draw that out, and really, in some ways, too simple, too simplistic. Oh, I could talk about that for a while. Make those parallels between, radiation in the industry and this radiating glory of God. And I have talked about that before, some of the other aspects. So interesting. I just love it. So anyway, it says, Yahweh's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by God's ark. I think he was killed by radiation exposure myself. David was displeased because Yahweh had broken out against Uzzah, and he called that place Perez Uzzah. To this day, David was afraid of Yahweh that day, and he said, how could Yahweh's ark come to me? So David would not move Yahweh's ark to be with him in David's city, but David carried it aside into Obed-Edom, the Gittite's house. Yahweh's ark remained in Obed-Edom, the Gittite's house, 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and all his house. I bet you they didn't reach out and touch it. Right? King David was told, Yahweh has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of God's ark. So David went and brought up the ark from the house of Obed-Edom into David's city with joy. There's that joy again. When they chose, bear with me, let me make a note of this scripture reference. 2 Sam 6, 13, 12. Okay. So they brought it up to David's city with joy. When those who bore Yahweh's ark had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David danced before Yahweh with all his might, and David was clothed in a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up Yahweh's ark with shouting and with the sound of a trumpet. As Yahweh's ark came into David's city, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out through the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Yahweh. She despised him in her heart. Now, this is the first time I ever thought of this, but I wonder if she despised him because she was mad at him for bringing her from her husband. Possibly. They brought in Yahweh's ark and set it in its place in the middle of the tent that David had pitched for it, and David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. When David had finished offering the burnt offering and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh of armies. He gave to all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, to both men and women, to everyone a portion of bread, dates, and raisins. So all the people departed, each to his own house. Then David returned to bless his household. Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious the king of Israel was today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the servants of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. David said to Michal, it was before Yahweh who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me prince over the people of Yahweh, over Israel. Therefore I will celebrate before Yahweh. I will be yet more vile than this, and will be base in my own sight. But of the servants of whom you have spoken, they will honor me. Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. See what I mean? It's what, maybe I talked about this yesterday. It's what I was saying, like there's certain leaders that God has anointed and appointed, and yet they make their own enemies, rightfully so. She had probably had reasons for not liking him. I used to have a bad impression of her, and now I'm looking at it totally different. Her father, her brother, they're all gone, and David took their place. So can't really blame the girl. All right, last chapter. When the king lived in his house and Yahweh had given him rest from all the enemies all around, the king said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I dwell in the house of cedar, but God's ark dwells within curtains. Nathan said to the king, go, do all that's in your heart, for Yahweh is with you. That same night, Yahweh's word came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, Yahweh says, should you build me a house for me? See what I mean? This translation. Should you build me a house for me to dwell in? For I have not lived in a house since the day I brought the children of Israel up out of Egypt, even to this day, but have moved around in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places in which I have walked with all the children of Israel, did I say a word to any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to be a shepherd of my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore tell my servant David this, Yahweh of armies says, I took you from the sheep pen, from following the sheep, to be prince over my people, over Israel. I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. I will make you a great name, like the name of the great ones who are in the earth. I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in their own place and be moved no more. The children of wickedness will not afflict them any more as at the first. And as from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, I will cause you to rest from all your enemies. Moreover, Yahweh tells you that Yahweh will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you sleep with your fathers, I will set up your offspring after you, who will proceed out of your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of my kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. If he commits, excuse me, if he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my loving kindness will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before you. Your house and your kingdom will be made sure forever before you. Your throne will be established forever. Nathan spoke to David all these words, and according to all this vision. Then David the king went in and sat before Yahweh, and he said, Who am I, Lord Yahweh, and what is my house that you have brought me this far? This is yet a small thing in your eyes, Lord Yahweh, but you have spoken also of your servant's house for a great while to come, and this among men, Lord Yahweh. What more can David say to you, for you know your servant, Lord Yahweh? For your word's sake, and according to your own heart, you have worked all this greatness to make your servant know it. Therefore you are great, Yahweh God. There is no one like you, neither is there any God beside you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. What one nation in the earth is like your people, even like Israel, whom God went to redeem to himself for a people, and to make himself a name, and to do great things for you, and awesome things for your land, before your people, whom God redeemed to yourself out of Egypt, from the nations and from their gods. You established for yourself your people Israel, to be your people forever, and you, Yahweh, become their God. Now, Yahweh God, a word that you have spoken concerning your servant and concerning his house, confirm it forever, and do as you have spoken. Let your name be magnified forever, saying, Yahweh of armies is God over all Israel, and the house of your servant David will be established before you. For you, Yahweh of armies, the God of Israel, have revealed to your servant, saying, I will build you a house. Therefore your servant has found in his heart to pray this prayer to you. Now, O Lord Yahweh, you are God, and your words are truth. You have promised this good thing to your servant. Now, therefore, let it please you to bless this house of your servant, that it may continue forever before you. For you, Lord Yahweh, have spoken it. Let the house of your servant be blessed forever with your blessing. So I love there that he's repeating God's word back to him and agreeing with it. New Testament principles. The Bible says there's a place, I don't know the address, but it says God is saying, to rehearse his word to him in his ears. Put me in remembrance of my word, it says. So here David's doing that. He's repeating back and saying, yes, may it be as you've said. He's releasing his faith and putting himself in agreement, submitting to God's word, all things that are principles for us to apply to our life today. Just like Mary did when the angel came to her and told her she was going to have a son, right? She submitted to that word humbly and accepted it. In fear and trembling even, right? So that's it for today. Please feel free again to share your thoughts. Check for the links in the description. Get that 2 Samuel overview I'm going to post right at the beginning of the description. And if I can find the other video about Amnon and Absalom, I'll post that there too. Okay, God bless you. Till next time.